one thing that I always thought was funny is every time Majin Bay talks about his decks, he's all like, "This deck sucks. Wizard sucks. Wizard sucks." You guys want to know what really sucks? Guardian with 4 blues in your hand. What the hell are you gonna do with that?
Hello and welcome back to the Arcane Games and Events YouTube channel. We've got yet another deck tech in the pipeline for you. This one, however, is going to feel like a blast from the past. It's Victor Goldmane, high and mighty, and who better to tell the story than Guardian extraordinaire Matthew Vore. Matt, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited to talk some Guardian with you, especially because thoughts of you on Oldham haunted me in my nightmares back when I was piloting Lexi when he was around.
Yeah, well, I hate to break it to you, but Victor's not really filling that void. He's kind of more aggressive, I guess. No more blocking, more attacking.
Which is good. I tend to be able to deal with that a little bit better than the whole Crown of Seeds Rampart thing.
Yeah. It shouldn't take 50 minutes to finish the round either, you know?
That's exactly right. I'm sure you were enjoying some lunch breaks at US Nats, courtesy of all those big, hefty attacks. Let's start, Matthew, with your experience at US Nationals. You took Victor Goldmane to that event, and it was in Las Vegas. How did you enjoy the City of Lights, I think is what we call it?
I
That's
personally
Paris.
don't really enjoy Vegas that much. I think it's kind of trashy, but that's just my opinion. But I did have a good time. We ended up carpooling on the drive there, and that was quite the experience on the way back. Everyone was like super tired, but definitely on the way there, it was like just ready to play flesh and blood and compete and try and become the national champion. And over the weekend, we hung out with the team and had a lot of fun. Didn't do too much sightseeing because, like I said, not really my thing, and the area for me, in my opinion, is not that nice. But I had a great time over the weekend.
So the Yard House at for team dinner didn't count as sightseeing for you?
No, I don't think so. Although there were some strippers trying to get our attention, we were walking by, both genders as well.
Only
Thought
in
that was
Vegas.
interesting. Only in Vegas.
Well, I think Victor's kind of an appropriate pick for Vegas, to be honest, because like I can't think of a more gaudy kind of hero in Flesh and Blood than Victor Goldmane.
I mean, he definitely has some aura with him. You sit down, and you say, "I'm playing Victor." Some people don't even know what that hero does. Like either they're that or they think, "Oh, this guy's definitely trolling. He's no way he's trying to win the game."
So Matt, I've noticed that like your engagement with Flesh and Blood has like waxed and waned through the years and through the seasons. And I did definitely notice a massive drop off after. I guess it wasn't really after Oldham. It was more after Dromai left the field. You were really good with that deck. But it definitely felt like it took like a Guardian's moment to come back into swing to really get your attention once again. I gotta ask, like, did this feel like that moment, and how did it feel getting back into your, I guess, Sabatons?
Yeah, I think for me, why it kind of was like that is because for a while I wasn't really excited to play any heroes, and then that kind of changed recently with Rosetta coming out, and I was like, "Oh, Verdance is pretty cool." And before, I don't know, I want to say like a year ago now or a couple months, 6 months ago, it was like, "Oh, she's cool, but like doesn't really fit the meta with like Aurora in and stuff like that." And she's not didn't feel quite good enough, but I was still playing her. And then all of a sudden, when the heroes that I like playing become the most competitive, is like when I'm strive the most to play the game, because I usually don't force myself to play what's perceived as the best deck. If it's like, especially if I don't enjoy actually playing it, which is why I put so much effort into this Victor deck specifically, because one, it's Guardian, and two, it kind of fits the style that I like to play. And the only other teammate that was on this deck was Chris, and he kept saying, "Only you could make this work because you're the Guardian guy." Or he said he, made a slight misplay and lost the game because of it. He's like, "Oh, you definitely wouldn't have done that. You have all the reps."
And a
So
lot
it's
of
good to
reps you
return
do
to
have.
Guardian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I do have to ask you about. I know this felt like a good moment for Guardian for you, and there we can go into all the meta reasons to bring out Victor Goldmane and start swinging some hammers. But Chris Ioli told me a little story about the real reason that he ordained to be on Victor Goldmane with you for this event. Can you recap that for me?
Well, Victor, he wasn't really sure who he wanted to play. He was between, I don't know, I think 4 or 5 different heroes, and the way he chose was basically spinning the wheel on the equal chance on which hero he was going to play. And it lands on Victor first. And he's like, man, I really don't want to play Victor. So he's like, okay, first hero to three, and I'll play that hero. Then all of a sudden, Victor's already at 3 wins before any other hero has more than one. So he's like, well, I guess we have to play Victor. And even after that, he was still like, man, I kind of just want to play Prism instead. You get so many free wins. And then he ended up challenging my brother to a Wizard versus Prism game. And he says, if
No.
I lose this game, I will not play, or I'll play Victor. And he ended up losing. He's like, all right, guess I'm not playing Prism.
He had all the chances in the world, and the universe still conspired against him.
Yep. Or, destiny to choose him or to choose to play Victor. Made the
so
choice for him.
so you didn't require that much convincing cosmically, I guess. You were set on Victor from the get-go.
I wasn't originally set on Victor. We had a few. I mainly worked with Chris and a few other people from the team, but it was mainly a smaller group of us that I was working with this time. And originally, I personally was on Verdance. They were kind of messing around. I know Chris was on testing out Slippy and Prism, and I was more leaning towards Verdance, which ended up being the best choice, I guess. But after testing with her for like I want to say over like a week and a half, we kind of came to the conclusion that she was good, but it didn't feel broken enough. Like the best thing she can do is the combo, obviously, or mini combo and kill them. But we ended up not thinking that was good enough. And one of the games I ended up losing on Talishar was to this random Victor deck, let's say. And he was playing. This is where it all started. So I got owned on Talishar by a guy playing Rally the Coast Guard and Fool's Gold. So the combo there is you block 2, you discard the Fool's Gold, you make a gold that blocks for 5, and you draw a card. And I was like, wait a minute, this is just broken. Block 5, draw a card, make a gold, which helps with the estate. Um, so I kind of threw that list together and we were playing with it and we're like, wait, this deck sucks. So you need to keep the Fool's Gold in your hand, then you need to draw the discard. We were playing like trade in to play from Arsenal and try and discard it that way. It didn't work. However, that then led us to KO because one of the new cards was Sea Legs, which I think Naib from the Runaways ended up bringing KO, and a pretty similar list to what we had. And that list I thought was very strong as well. The only problem was it was rather reliant on rolling scab skins, and I would not describe the way I like to play Fab as, I guess I need to roll scabs this turn. If I hit a 1, I guess I'll pass. So although that deck was very strong, I didn't think I would pilot it at peak efficiency. And if I ended up losing, one game to scab skins, I'd probably just tilt throw the rest of the games after that and just be like, oh, roll scabs, roll scabs. So I wasn't able to get in the right mentality. And then we kind of looped back around to the Victor deck as a whole. And we're like, well, what if you just play, like, for example, the other new card, which is the Fabled?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's super insane, one of the best cards for him. And it ended up being just good enough. We tested it into a bunch of different matchups. All the top dogs, we thought he was very favored into every single one of them, except Verdance and New. We'll get into that, but every other hero he was just completely dominating. So that's how I ended up on Victor, and then I ended up being able to convince Chris to play with me.
Through a lot of subterfuge and a lot of things out of your control that conspired with you.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get into this Victor Goldmane deck, shall we, Matt? Here he is in all of his splendor for all to see. It strikes me that you didn't particularly like the, I don't know, I guess I should say the risk proposition of rolling scabs every turn, because in my experience, Victor, while he is a Guardian, and Guardians generally lean on very consistent numbers, i.e., pitch a blue to swing a hammer for 4, a lot of turns in the game, and to grind your opponent out. Victor definitely has like the most capability for gambling out of anyone in the Guardian class, and that's through clashing, which inherently is just one of those mechanics that can really go your way or it can really not, despite whether you build your deck optimally for it or not. Have you had any issues clashing that have like kind of tilted you out of games when it doesn't go your way?
Um, Not really tilted because it's kind of the deck doesn't need to win every single clash for it to be powerful or feel powerful. Whereas like this turns you were rolling scabs, for example, you on the very specific turn that you're rolling scabs, you very specifically need to hit because if you hit, it's like double or sometimes triple value on that turn, depending on the context of your hand. Whereas Victor, the value that you get from just like playing that, for example, just blocking with tested strength. If you just block with tested strength and you lose or you tie the clash, most of the time your opponent can't do anything with the gold if you lost. And if you tie, then nothing happens, and you basically play the sink below. And every deck in the game, for the most part nowadays, is even playing sink below or shelter.
Mm.
So the value is there just based off the face value, and then the high roll potential, or not really high roll because the deck is kind of with the format and the heroes that are being played, he wins almost. I don't know the actual number, but most clashes that he does, and that's when the value that Victor gets just becomes astronomical, and he throw or gets more points. Basically, the point meta is kind of like his place, I guess. Um, but yeah, when the cards hit, there's just insane value. And yes, there is risk, but the risk or the benefits outweigh the risks, and the downside like almost doesn't exist depending on what hero you give a gold if you actually lose. So
Last question before we get into the actual cards in the 80. When Victor first came out in heavy hitters, you being a Guardian aficionado, did he make it on your radar, or at the time when he first came out, were you kind of like, this is just another Guardian that isn't my flavor?
originally he wasn't really on my radar because back in heavy hitters, meta KO was the most popular deck by like a huge margin. And, that would be a matchup. Like if KO would be the most popular hero, I wouldn't probably consider Victor because in that matchup, you're going to be losing clashes. And a lot of the time, the clashes matter for them. So sometimes, like I said, they utilize the gold that you give them. If they draw all blues on Blood Rush, they're like draw a gold or crack a gold, draw a card, gain a pitch, and then all of a sudden, swing big or wild ride into swing big and stuff like that. It becomes insane. So against, I didn't really have him on my radar in the beginning just because the meta that was currently being played. But now, like, it's kind of opened up for him to rise up again, I think.
Well, let's take a look at exactly how you decided to attack it. Let's start with the equipment here, Matt. We've got 8 cards in terms of arena pieces, and there are some missing. And maybe I want to address that first. The first thing I notice here, Matt, is no Fandel Spring Tunic.
Don't need it. Bad card. In actuality, the reason why we didn't play it is because there's kind of two reasons why Tunic's in the deck. One is to play Pummel, um, and the second one is to play the 4 for 8s for free. So you pitch a blue, you use Tunic, you attack 4 for 8, either debilitate or choke slam, which is good value. However, you're also losing the block 2 from Tectonic, which I think, shocker, I think this format is a higher blocking format, or you want your armor to block more, especially with how many matchups we're playing the golden helmet into. So your helmet doesn't block a lot of the time. So if you're running Tunic, the golden helmet, all of a sudden, your armor suite is not looking like a Guardian. It's more looking like a scuffed Room Blade, basically. Um, so we thought the value of that, as well as since you're winning most of the clashes. So if you win a clash and you hit, I think it's Wallop is the one that makes a Vigor, I believe, or
Correct.
Trounce you win, or Clash of Vigor you win. You almost float your Tunic resource. So in actuality, it feels like you wouldn't have more resources with Tectonic, but you do have it up more often because you can, for example, win one clash every single turn, and depending on which class you're winning or what card you're winning with, you might have the extra resource every single turn, which just
Mm.
allows you or either allows you to carry it into the next turn with Tectonic or use it on that turn specifically. So sometimes in my games, basically, I would have been able to use Tunic like 2 or 3 turns in a row, whereas if you were actually running Tunic, you couldn't do that, which is why we chose Tectonic over Tunic, or to cut that from the deck entirely.
So in certain senses, like it blocks better. That value is plain to see, but also it's like an excess vigor token sink in a certain respect, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it's like a lot of the times, for example, with Tunic, the Vigor token, you couldn't do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sure, you can save the Tunic, but then all of a sudden your Tunic's been sitting on 3 for, 7 or 8 turns, and it's like, well, why are you running it in the first place if,
Mm-hmm.
on average you're not using it every, third or fourth turn? It's like, well, it's there when you need it, but you're down the health, and then sometimes you don't even use it at all because the clashes just line up so well that you have the extra resources anyway. So you might as well just have the 2 block, in my opinion.
Next up, I noticed in the weapon slot, in the weapon slot, there is no Anothos option here. Your only loadout is Miller's Grindstone and Aurum Aegis. Care to talk about that?
So originally, we kind of started with an older Victor list. It was actually the one that Chris won Age with not so long ago. So I'm sure that's on the website that you guys can
Mm-hmm.
see. But that list originally had 3 hammers. It has Miller's, it has the Baby Hammer or Titan's Fist, and Anathos. And we kind of just wanted more slots in the deck. Whereas, and also, in addition to that, like the hammer really didn't matter. Like I said, the combo of having the gold helmet, like every time you're running the gold helmet, you also have to run the gold shield by they just kind of combo together because it turns on the Goldmane estate off rip.
Mm,
So there's almost never when you were playing Anathos, and we even had Beltings and stuff in the deck originally, for example, for Gravy Bones. But the problem is that Beltings kind of just felt bad. So you're like 5 go again at a 1 health ally, and then
yeah.
overkill another ally by you basically overkill 10 damage on that turn. So it's like, what are we playing Anathos for? Sure, it's like good in some other matchups, like notably the Guardian Mirror. So if you're playing any of the Guardian Mirrors, Anathos/Sledge is usually better, but you can still put in a lot of work with the Golden Shield because, well, shocker, his Victor's best card is the Goldmane estate, especially in matchups where you're pretty even and you're both, blocking decks. It's
Mm.
almost like his mini combo, where you're gonna play the fair game for, 20 turns of the game, and then all of a sudden you're gonna be like, my one card's gonna get 10 value, and then I'm gonna play another one, it's gonna get another 10 value, and then your opponent just can't keep up. So the shield has a lot of value, and it kind of acts on both access where it helps turn on the gold main estate for offensive value, and it also blocks. So if you're running Anathos, for example, you lose the block value, and you're also losing offensive points because you're denied playing the gold main off rip. And just
Mm.
throughout the game, if you play, 1 or 2 gold mains, you're down 2 damage just from that, not having that 1 extra gold.
You've talked about Crown of Dominion quite a bit. So not only is Victor high and mighty, he's also King Victor Goldmane high and mighty. And you've mentioned that the main use case here is that you can visit the Goldmane estate and generate might tokens with it immediately. The
Yep.
first second you draw. Is that the only use case for Crown of Dominion? Is there any other reasons that first gold token is so important to Victor?
So yeah, the other reason is his hero ability. So it also turns on his hero ability from the first turn without requiring you to block with the shield. So like before, if you're running the blocking helmets, which we do have in the list, Crown of Providence,
Mm-hmm.
um, usually the first equipment you block with first is always the shield, because if you lose a clash and you haven't, it's like the very first clash of the game, for example, most of the time, depending on the deck, you're going to crack your shield um, to reclash. Whereas if you have the gold helmet, you can just crack the gold, keep the shield for its block 1 value, because you should be able to generate more gold off the first gold crack, basically. And if you don't, then you always have the shield as another backup the next time you lose, anyways. So it's like it's the same thing where it doesn't have defense, but it kind of adds defense to the shield in a way, because you're still allowed to block with the shield for the second time.
Mm.
So
Okay, cool. So you've made the case for Crown of Dominion. What are the instances, because that is such an important headpiece, that you're going to bring in Crown of Providence instead?
me and Chris were kind of conflicting on when you should play Providence or not. I ended up playing Providence into most of the assassins because they have so much disruption, and at the same time, it also, for 1 turn, it lets you blank Codex in a way. Not really blanket, like they still get a lot of value from it, and they also get your helmet. But if you have a very good hand, you're able to discard the worst card in your hand and then trade it for a new card, basically. And I thought that was good enough reason to run Providence instead. And another reason why Providence to me was more appealing in that matchup was because you're already poised to win most clashes with them, because most assassin cards are 4 or less. The only ones being above 3 are CNC, E-Strike if they're playing it, and Leave No Witness. And then they have a bunch of attack reactions and blanks, not even zeros. So Rouse wins that clash. So I didn't feel like the gold insurance in the beginning of the game was worth that value,
Hmm.
as well as it being like a double thing where you're also running Trounce in that matchup. So you also have more ways to generate gold, so theoretically, you should be able to get gold online faster for the estate, for example. Um, so it's not as a pivotal in another matchup where you might lose a clash or tie a clash, where you really need the extra gold to either um, or sink your opponents and try and win that way, or just hold it back in the reserve for the Goldmane estate being online in the early game, basically.
The foot slot, the only choice here besides, of course, no ruined boots, is quick dodge flexors here. I mean, anything particular you want to say about this card besides the fact that it can block like 8 on a single turn?
Card's just good, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's the best choice. Sometimes, most of the time, given your quicken opponent, your opponent's going to use it to the fullest of their ability. And if you ever give an assassin a quicken token and they're like Bonds of Agony for one go again, they get to be Slippy for a turn, and you're like,
Mm.
well, and one thing you'll notice about Victor as well is he's not particularly great around or against playing against attack reactions. So it's like if you just say no blocks, then they might go, deal 10 damage, rip your hand apart, and then your hand sucks. So yeah.
So I do notice that there is only one AB in the entire list. Can we talk about considerations for more and maybe why we didn't get more than just the AB one?
There's only 2 matchups I think you'd play more than AB1 in the entire game, and to no surprise, it is both wizards, one being Verdance and the other one being Kano. I don't even think you need more than AB1 into Asilio. So the reason why we chose not to is because, one, we thought Kano would be not necessarily in a bad spot, but if we thought people, if they were committing to bringing Kano, they were gonna have to commit to losing 1 to 2 games just based off the way that the Kano decks are constructed now.
Mm.
And we thought most people wouldn't take that risk. They'd try and bring a deck that would go potentially 8-0 in CC, which, to be fair, Kano can still do that, but we thought, people would be down on him. And the second reason is, against Verdance, sometimes the extra AB doesn't necessarily help you at all. Now, if they and it's kind of interesting because the Verdance has, obviously, or most lists have 2 ways to present into you. They can either go Aether Tide or they can go Waning Moon. And obviously, if you have AB3, Aether Tide becomes much much less appealing. However, Waning Moon in recent times has picked up huge popularity, um, and most people are playing it anyways. So in that scenario, AB1 usually is better when they're on Moon. So we thought that most people would be on Moon, and we just present AB1 and have the best chance with all the armor block, because if Verdance just tries to sit there and do her combo, if you're at 40 health, she has to have a very big combo in specific cards while you're hitting her for, like 10 or something every
Mm.
single turn. And eventually, and the other downside of Verdance is she has to combo in her turn. So if you're able to get her low enough before she can have the perfect combo hand, then she's like, oh, well, I have to block on my turn that I have the full combo. And it's like, oh, I almost had you and stuff like that. In reality, her combo is not as powerful as you might think on paper, just because the caveat of having to be on her turn. So we thought that AB1 was basically just good enough to play into both wizards. So we're like, okay, we'll take 2 extra sideboard slots.
I forgot to mention the arm slot. That's Gauntlets of Iron Will. In general, I think this is just best in slot for Guardian because it's the only temper 2 in that slot. But does the card's text hit anybody in particular that you're worried about in this meta or were worried about in
Uh,
this meta?
Actually, there's another Guardian card that you can play. It's Greater Fist, but that card's just straight up worse most of the time because you're never breaking it. However, Gauntlets actually has use case and has text specifically against the assassins. It's very good against playing around certain things. For example, I know this doesn't come up much, but just the one that's off the top of my head. New plays Surgical Extraction. If you block one card in this, it plays around Hiss, for example. It doesn't play around Venomous Bite, but it does play around that. And usually this also in the assassin games gets more than the 3 block value, because one, it either stops them the way, depending on how you block, stops them from playing their attack reaction altogether, or they play the attack reaction and get -1 value. So sometimes, against assassins and specifically, you're getting +4 to 5 value instead of 3.
That rounds out the equipment suite. There is none in the sideboard. I moved it all to the main board so we could talk about it all together. So that's the suite for Victor Goldmane and Matthew Vore. Moving on to the main deck, Matt. I think besides all the reasons that you mentioned already enticing you towards Victor, I'm sure this card, Riches of Tropal-Dhani, was at the forefront. This is the new legendary gem from High Seas. It says, when this is pitched, create a gold token. And if there's one thing we've learned so far, it's that Victor likes gold. Talk to me about this card.
Yeah, I think it's very unassuming, or if you didn't look at this card, give it a second glance with Victor's text, and specifically, whenever you pitch this card on your turn as Victor, you'll make a gold, and you'll draw a card from that. Now, it becomes kind of insane when you go pitch Riches to crack a gold. So you're drawing a card from gold, and then you're also replenish the gold to make, or go, so you stay gold even, and you draw 2 cards. Now, this becomes very, very OP, and we've been trying to figure out ways to shuffle your deck. However, we couldn't think of anything good to see or to get it come back. However, it does play key roles in matchups like Florian, for example, when you're going to go second cycle, and then all of a sudden you get to break the math of the game. You're like, you have all blues in your deck, and you're like crack golds to draw cards, and you get to play Rouse into a big Guardian attack, and all of a sudden Florian's like, oh, I can't compete with this. All my Earth 2 blocks don't do anything. So, and also it gives you some insane high roll potential, not only against the longer matchups, but also the really fast matchups. Because if you see this in the first, couple hands of the game, just drawing 2 extra cards. Like, for example, one play that I did over the weekend was crack a gold to draw 2 cards, and then draw 2 blues, and then I'm like, make a Surge Spinal Crush, which is like, oh, then your opponent has to respect it, then I get to keep the Surge for next turn. And it's like, that's just insane value. So the card, the way that this card works is just insane for Victor. I think he might be the best hero at utilizing it, even more so than, for example, Gravy Bones, which I think most people probably consider to be the best at using them, or Kasai, for example. I know Kasai players were really excited about this. But guys, I'm telling you, Victor is the truth. Victor uses the card the best.
And yeah, it's hard to argue with when you say, oh, I pitched this to break a gold and I draw 2 cards instead of 1. That does sound pretty insane. I do wonder, though, Matt, is like Guardian math is pretty rigid in terms of its resource, like the way the curves kind of work out. I mean, like, case in point, most Guardian decks are running Tunic so that they can send a choke slam off of a blue and that kind of thing. Is there anything awkward about having to include a yellow in your resource base?
So it is a little bit weird. However, for example, if you need a blue instead of the yellow, you can always gamble. This is another reason to play Tectonic over Tunic, where if your Tunic's not online and you have this card in your hand, and you need, for example, in this scenario that you're describing, you need a blue, you can't do anything. You're kind of screwed. Whereas if you have Tectonic, there's always the out of pitch to make a seismic, make a gold, and draw a card, and then you have a blue, and you can, for example, attack with Debilitate or Chokeslam on that turn, and then you also carry it over for the next turn. Sometimes you hit a red, but most of the time, like, depending on what cards you've seen in your deck, the odds are that you're going to draw a blue, and or another yellow, and it's like, hopefully you can continue your turn like that. But the upside / power level of the card completely outweighs the fact that it's a yellow, in my opinion. And yeah, that's about it.
Because reasons. I dig it.
Because reasons, cards OP, play with it, make your own assumption.
Okay, so let's go over the rest of the main board here. Matt, it looks like that we see a lot of usual suspects from Guardian, especially making up the main board. You know, Spinal Crush is an absolute mainstay. Test of Strength is awesome in Victor. Enlightened Strike, CNC, both just fantastic cards, especially when you're playing that value game plan that you think Victor kind of like hedges towards.
Hmm.
Debilitate, however, is one of those. I don't know. I tend to think of Guardian Crush attacks kind of like Azalea's arrows. Like they can work in toolbox fashion. You just kind of load up your
Yeah.
sideboard based on the matchup and bring them in as they would. Which does make me curious as to why Red Debilitate is making it into the main board here. Does it hit pretty much everybody in the meta right now?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, every hero besides the wizards are going to attack with you, and even, to be honest, the wizards are most likely going to attack you anyways. For example, Cilio is gonna try and do a bunch of attacks and then arcane you, and Verdance most of the time, the highest value thing she can do is block with both arcane spells and play felling.
Mm-hmm.
So Debilitate hits literally every hero in the game. That's why it's the only one in the main board. And when we get to the sideboard, you'll see how you describe the more sort of toolbox answers to most matchups, um, which makes sideboarding also very easy. You kind of go, does this card work into the hero I'm playing? Yes, play it. If not, no, don't play it. So makes sideboarding this deck very easy, I think.
So the other power card that we have in Victor's arsenal is his specialization. That's the Golden Sun. You've talked several times, specifically when we were having a conversation about Crown of Dominion, how powerful it is to, generate a ton of might tokens off of Goldmane Estate. Is the Golden Sun the card that you're generally trying to pair with Goldmane Estate, or does it just not really matter? Like, is overpower not that valuable of a keyword in this deck?
So the overpower is very relevant, except against Assassin, because Assassin has a bunch of attack reactions that they can block with their whole hand, and Warrior. I can't exclude Warrior. Warrior also has some loopholes, but most of the other heroes in the game, it basically reads as dominate, because Assassin is like the only one playing not only attack reactions but also defense reactions. Um, but most of the time, you don't care about the overpower specifically, because a lot of the time you send this if you're playing against, for example, Syndra or something, they're just going to say Lamau take 10. I wasn't even considering blocking anyways. It doesn't have an
Mm-hmm.
on hit. But just the reason why I think this card is so powerful is because just a number on it. So normally for Guardian, you have to pay 6 resources to attack for 10, for example, and that
Mm-hmm.
would be in the red slot. So you're playing Red Thunderquake, for example, is one that comes to mind, or Batter Pulp, the new card. Whereas this one's a yellow. It also has a special effect where if you win a clash, you make a gold, which, if you learn anything about Victor, you like gold as Victor, you're a greedy guy, you're a greedy goblin, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, this card's just kind of all arounder. And if you end up pitching it in the early game, it comes back around depending on the matchup. And you're like, oh, 10 overpower. And, most of the time they exhausted all their D reacts, or, not assassin slash warrior specifically, but the other heroes. Sometimes you can just sneak in with 10 overpower and win. Or like you were saying, this usually is one of the best cards to pair with the mites popping. However, there's, a bunch of choices. Specifically, this card becomes the best when you're trying to end the game on that turn, because your opponent can't block. So if you make, 4 or 5, 6 mites on the other turn, you're like 17 overpower, all of a sudden the hero's dead from 10 health. And, they kept their armor to try and stop an on hit like
Mm-hmm.
Spinal Crush, and they get completely punished by just straight up dying. But some other, popular contenders for that combo are, any crush card with an on hit and or CNC. But yeah, the card's just insane because it says 4 for 10 basically most of the time. And it's another reason that Dominion becomes much more powerful, especially the shorter the game goes on, because you really sometimes you're starved for gold and you just want to resolve this card for 4 for 10 just because you're playing the point game basically. So if you ever get to, have a Vigor and 2 card 10 somebody, it's like, oh, it's this deck's felling the crown is how I would describe it, honestly, because it's like, oh, felling's, 2 for 8, you steal a card from your opponent. This is just 2 card 10.
Mm-hmm.
So
You take the card
very
that
good
you
card.
would rob from your opponent, and you just stack the value on the offense, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things that I've heard from a lot of Guardian players since New has been in the meta, which spoiler alert, she's not anymore, folks. Don't have to worry
Thank
about
God.
New in Guardian anymore. is that a lot of like some Guardian players, their approach to dealing with her was just to not run good Guardian blues because she would just swing them back at you. You basically, your resource base is full of amazing Guardian cards. It seems like in general your approach to that matchup was, hey, bummer. If I hit him, I hit him. Hopefully I won't.
So, me and Chris were joking about that matchup, and specifically, we're like, what if we just play all yellows? Spoiler alert, that sucks. Anyways, besides gimping your deck in every other matchup, you want all these blues in all the other matchups, and at the same time, that matchup is still very winnable. It kind of resolves around if you get to play the Goldmane estate. We might go more in depth later, but
Mm.
I ended up playing 3 news over the weekend, and I lost all 3. However, I'm an idiot, and I should have beat Michael Hamilton. So that's got to be something. That's got
Mm.
to be something.
And you very
Um,
nearly did too. I watched the end of that matchup. It was insane. We'll go over that in a little bit.
yeah. So the reason why we chose to play all the blues that Nuke can abuse against us is because the matchup, even if you try and gimp yourself, it's still bad because
Mm.
just the natural way that New plays, she's very hard to kill while also robbing cards from your hand and being tricksy basically, and she's very hard to play against at a high level. So we're like, we should just sacrifice more points in a matchup that we're already losing to be better into literally everything else. And at the end of the day, the matchup, even with all these blue cards, you can still win. Now, is it a very high chance? No. Are you unfavored? Yes. Can you win though? Yes. So we're like, well, we also didn't think New was going to be that popular. Like we knew people were going to play her, but we thought she would fall off specifically because of the new heroes, which ended up being kind of true. So we kind of made the right call there. So turns out in
I
Guardian, you want your blues to do something when you have to run so many of them.
and do something they definitely do. And one of the things that they do is they clash, which aligns perfectly with the Victor game plan in general. I do notice, however, that Clash of Might has not made it into the 80, only Clash of Vigor. And I notice in general that Vigor seems to be the one of the two heavy hitters tokens that you generally like to create more in this deck. Can we talk a little bit about why Vigor in general is better for you to be creating?
So specifically for our deck, like we were talking about in the equipment, you only have Tectonic, so you want more access to Vigor, so you can attack with the 4/8s, for example, any of the Chokeslam Debilitate or the Golden Sun. And another thing that most people might not know is that Vigor also enables CNC Pummel,
Hmm.
because all it does is make a resource at the start of your turn. And if you look at your opponent with 3 cards and you're like CNC for 6, 2 floating, they're like, oh, they have a midlife crisis over there. Like, oh, should I block or should I not block and stuff like that. So the reason it makes specifically more sense in this deck to have Vigor over Might. And we thought that it made more sense that if we were going to run Tunic, we should have Might. But honestly, moving forward, it might be depending on what heroes, take up the mantle basically of new slash the Rise of Verdance. You
Hmm.
might want to run both Clash cards, just because things like Thunk and the Wallop also become much more appealing. Because if all of a sudden you turn your Clash of Vigor into a mini Trounce, like you don't draw a card, but you generate a pitch next turn as well as a
Right.
damage. So if you block with your blue card for 3, you make a pitch that you can either float into the next turn or use that turn and 1 damage. Your blue card presumably got 5 value. If you don't want to count the pitch, it got 4 value. So blue for 4 value, that is, very good. And another thing that we haven't gone over at all, um, is what Clash does. Like, for most of the time, them seeing your card does not nearly matter as much as you seeing your opponent's top card.
Hmm.
For example, you draw most of the time, you're going to be drawing a blue card. All the blue cards do the same. Specifically, you might attack with it depending on the context of your hand if you have all blues, but usually you're going to be blocking more if you have all blues. However, you get to see one card in your opponent's hand next turn, and one matchup that comes to mind immediately of wow, this is very important is Assassin.
Hmm.
So depending on what card you reveal, it might be an attack reaction, and then that you get even more value about what's in your opponent's hand the next turn. So all of a sudden, when they go, Bonds of Agony, if they're playing Slippy, for example, and you're like, well, I know you revealed another stealth card in your hand, so I can eliminate that, and you pitch a stealth card. So the chance that you have, enough attack reactions to make this actually, a threat is pretty much zero. So
Mm-hmm.
the value, the better player you are, the more information, like, you can use the information that you gain better. It's almost like when I defend with this, I also get to opt and see your card. Like, they both players get to see it. However, as well as being able to crack golds to draw cards, knowing the top card of your deck for Victor specifically is very good. Like, for example, if you clash twice in the same turn and you win,
Mm-hmm.
the card stays there. So you're like, oh, Spinal Crush is on top, and I have all blues, so I should just crack a gold to draw the Spinal Crush, attack with it, or, any red attack for that matter fills that role. So yeah, the clash cards in a sense are just like Giga OP, I think. So I think moving forward, you might consider running 6 of them in the main board.
So yeah, to draw a similar, to draw a parallel to something a little more current, like in a sense, Victor kind of gets to play with Gravy Bones' compass every turn that he's clashing, but not just with his deck, with also with his opponent's deck.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it's adjacent. Yes, I think.
It is pretty interesting. I mean, when you think about an entire offhand slot being devoted to, oh, I can look at the top card of my deck, and yes, of course, give a Watery Grave card go again. And Victor kind of just has it built in innately to the rest of his cards. It's making me think very differently about clashing.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to context, like, how much value that is, because sometimes it's zero, and other times, in this specific case that I brought up, knowing which card is in your assassin's hand, that's like insane value. So I'm not exactly sure on how much value it is, but it is a non-zero amount most of the time, I think, which it shouldn't just be, overlooked, I think.
So besides the clash cards that we've talked about in the blue base, there's a lot of normal suspects for Guardian. There's Chokeslam, Macho Grande to close out some games, late game in your pitch stack, Thunderquake, just a solid numbers card. But I think we can kind of glaze over those because most people have encountered these at this point. Let's instead linger on Visit Goldmane Estate because you say that this is like the power card in the deck.
Yes, with Awakening now being banned, I think this might single-handedly be the best Guardian card in the game that's legal to be played, and I'm not sure it's even particularly close,
Hmm.
even if you count Oakenold or Felling the Crown. I think this is more powerful than both of those it is in Jarl, just because what it enables you to do in the early game, you get insane value, and basically any game or any hero in the game that wants to enact a game plan similar to yours, which is block when it makes sense, basically, or block when I have D-reacts and blocking cards, and basically play value every turn. This kind of flips the game on its head and be like, nope, I'm gonna actually win the whole value game regardless of what you're doing, because your hero doesn't have a huge payoff card like this does. So this card is kind of just insane. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It wins you aggro matchups, but it's just off raw value, and it wins you mid-range matchups just because you're gonna flip the game and basically turn into a combo deck almost. So yeah, this card is just insane powerhouse, and the deck does everything you want to do.
Turns out nepotism is an incredibly powerful keyword when you can access it.
Yeah.
Okay, you've made the case for Visit Goldmane Estate. I have no further questions. Yeah, except I mean, we've talked about the potential drawbacks of clashing. I think any time that I have sat across from a victor and they're having a bad time because they're losing clashes, it is kind of because of this card. So do you think there's almost like a power check on this card being, as you say, the most powerful guardian card able to be played at the moment because it kind of is counterintuitive with the game plan it's trying to enact in terms of clashing?
Um, it is obviously a little bit counterintuitive, but like I said, the power level of the card, like, it doesn't, like, I think it for example, if it had a value or attack value, or it's like if it's revealed win the clash, like similar effect as Golden Sun,
Mm-hmm.
like it would just be insane, and you'd probably run literally, I don't know, 12 clash cards. You run Clash of Vigors and Mites, or not Vigor. No, yeah, Vigor and Mites, both red and blue. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna clash you every single turn, and then make a bunch of golds and just out trade you that way. I'm gonna block and then draw cards and then kill you through the Goldmane estate. So it is anti synergy with clashing in specific, but it doesn't really matter because if you look at most of the rest of the deck, you're winning every single
Mm-hmm.
clash you do. Um, the only heroes that you struggle into are a couple, and the only cards in specific decks that you lose to are like CNC, which most decks are playing CNC right now. Or, for example, Cadaverous Tealing's another one that's the Earth ones. But even the Earth heroes, you're beating every Felling the Crown. Like, even if you look at Wallop, for example, it's a 5 power non-popper. It still wins against the Earth heroes cards because they don't have the decompose keyword on, or not the decompose keyword, but their passive buff power ability, even if they're
Mm.
decomposed, while revealing from the top of the deck. So the benefits outweigh the anti synergy.
And also, it sounds like what you're saying, in a certain sense, is that the drawback is almost what makes the deck building challenge and puzzle a little more rewarding.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's move on to the sideboard now, Matt. There's only two blues in the sideboard, and both of those blues are Rouse the Ancients. Um, this card's a monster. If Guardian hasn't been in your local meta in a long time, keep your eye out for this card. Matt, break it down. Why is this card so awesome in Guardian?
This card's awesome because uh, Guardian doesn't want to be aggressive most of the time in every matchup. And by aggressive, I mean, go again multiple attacks a turn. In most matchups, we just want one big attack. However, there are certain matchups in the game where you want to have go again and or the ability to scale your hand up as much as possible. One of the cards that enables this is a Goldmane, like we already talked about, a great card. You want to play it everywhere. Whereas this one, 2 block in the bottom right corner becomes a liability a lot of the time
Mm.
to have it in your main deck. So we opted to have it in the sideboard as the only 2 blues. Usually in Flesh and Blood, you don't want to sideboard your blues unless it's specific tech cards like Poison the Well. So it kind of makes sense from that avenue. And one of the reasons why this is included is because if you're playing for example, against Florian, the game is going to go long.
Mm-hmm.
So and like I said, you're usually pitching the riches, and one of the best cards to enable the riches is this one specifically because at the end of the game you have all blues in your deck. You're like, oh, I'll crack a gold, and let's say you have 7 gold at the end of the game. You've used all your estates, so all you have to do, I think what everyone's learned in limited now is, cracking gold to turn on things like high tide is very good. Well, how
Mm-hmm.
about, this is kind of Victor's high tide card in a sense, while also being able to be aggressive in the matchups where you're given a little bit more space. All of a sudden you can go, 7 go again into 8, or 7 go again into 10 with the Golden Sun, or 7 go again into 6 with CNC. Um, so this card is just really a powerhouse, and the only reason that it's not a 3 of is because we couldn't justify it as being a sideboard blue like I was talking about. And the other reason is it doesn't synergize well with itself. So if you draw multiple rouses in the same hand, all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, I can't even turn it on, you
Mm.
know, specifically, especially if you have like 3 in your hand, for example, because there's no way to turn it on at all unless you have Pulverize in your hand. But yeah, it just fills the role of being, I think, the best go again card that he can play. So I'd value this card. I would play 3 Rouse before I even consider playing things like Belting or
Mm.
Outmuscle, just because one, it's blue, and two, it attacks for more, doesn't have any downside. So yeah.
You mentioned something interesting there, Matt. Rouse the Ancients is Victor's high tide, and specifically with when paired with Tropal-Dhani. I'm trying to picture the turn cycle where this kind of makes sense, and I think it's where, like, basically it affords you the ability late game to, say, block with 1 or 2 cards from hand. Then you pitch Tropal-Dhani, draw 2 cards because you're creating a gold and breaking a gold, and then drawing into the power you need to reveal for Rouse the Ancients. Am I kind of getting that correctly?
Yeah, that's a lot of the time if the game goes long, and I think the matchup where this really shines, like I was talking about earlier, is Florian, as well as many of the puffing games we played were going extremely long. And, uh, this kind of lets you Guardian blues are already, for the most part, more powerful than other people's blues. So if a Guardian hand is all blue and your opponent's hand is all blue, usually the Guardian's coming out on top just because, you can block one card and then attack for 8, for example.
Hmm.
Well, this one just lets you, expand on that if you're given the opportunity to have more cards left over. So in the end game, just powerhouse blue does what any other blue would do. You have to pitch one most of the time on your turn, so most of the time the block 2 isn't relevant as well.
Next up, we have Midas Touch, 3 copies in the sideboard. Does this indicate that you were, in general, worried about the Gravy Bones matchup?
Yeah. So originally, like I said, we had the Belting and Anethos, and we're like, well, overkilling allies by 10 sucks. So we kind of slotted this in as the replacement for Zealous Belting. And another reason why this was considered is because we thought it was pretty similar power level, in the Gravy matchup, uh, for killing allies as Belting is. Whereas this card also, I think, lets you beat, I'd say, I don't know, 80% of the prisms you play against, because
Mm.
especially with the way that the decks are constructed, they're very high herald right now, and kind of the only win con they have is like looping you with ALS. And even if they, get the time to set up the full loop, this kind of breaks the loop, as well as being able to pop the library. So if you have this in your deck, the triples and or the riches and Golden Sun, you have 7 yellows. So breaking the library is not, out of the realm of possibility. And it's like, if you stop them from looping you and you break the library and, they're light on auras, like, how are they going to win the game? They're kind of just screwed. You're like Herald, and like, okay, one of my 40 poppers will
Right.
block. So there is downsides against Gravy, which we'll, get into. But I think for the tournament, it was a good choice.
Well, let's go to the Gravy matchup right now, because you didn't face any in your tournament run, so we won't have a chance to touch on it
Oh,
when you when we go over your matchups. Let's go over the Gravy matchup right now, because that is definitely one that you will have to contend with, unlike new in the future.
I actually did, not in the not calling nationals, but I did play round one of the
Hmm.
Battle Hardened and win. Um, But the role in that matchup, what we kind of discovered, Chris ended up losing 2 very close games trying the fatigue strat against them.
Mm.
And what we kind of realized, what we didn't have before, is that the good players are kind of just like, I think the Runaways podcast this week kind of points it out perfectly. They kind of just sit there and have, 20 cards, or not, 10 cards in their graveyard that they can play at any time. And they're just going to let them sit there. And you can't interact. Victor specifically can't interact with them in any way unless you play like weird cards like Gravekeeping and stuff, which
Hmm.
you're not, shocker, you're not going to do. So they kind of have inevitability in a sense where they're just going to be able to set up a huge turn and you're not going to be able to contend with it. So moving forward, I think the way that you want to play Victor into Gravy is be the aggressor. So instead of killing every single ally you see, kind of like how Guardian versus Illusionist would go,
Right.
I think going face is going to have much higher value. So I think the play pattern is going to be another card in the sideboard that we haven't talked about yet is Performance Bonus, but that card is very insane against the Gravy matchup. And really, this is kind of the only matchup that we ended up playing it into. However, you could
Mm.
consider playing it in other matchups where you want to be the super aggressor, like Verdance. So you like, give me a card or I draw a card. Um, but this card specifically ended up being the best go again card against Gravy Bones because you get to kill an ally for free, you make a gold, and then you draw a card.
Hmm.
Now, that doesn't seem like super OP on paper, but in the scenario that I'm describing now with how you want to play against Gravy, this is the best card to fill that slot because you get to go 3 go again, kill one of your allies. Because, like I said, most of the time they're kind of setting up for this super Giga stack in a sense. I wouldn't describe it necessarily, like, sometimes they play out and just mid-range you down and stuff like that, but most of the time they're sitting on things. They want to combo their 2 big guys together. It's like they either want to play 2 Humper Dicks, they want to play a Sawbones and a Chum out on the same turn and
Hmm.
stuff like that. And one thing we realize moving forward is it's very hard for them. So they set up and then they play multiple allies in a turn and they're like, go, and they can't the turn after that, it's much harder to utilize all the allies at the same time unless they have
Right.
passive effects. So I think moving forward, what you want to do is kill the ones with passive effects with stuff like Performance Bonus, Or another one that we originally had in the deck as well was Strike Gold, which is 0 for 4. If it hits, create a gold token. And specifically, if you're running that combo, you would want Snapdragon Scalers. So it's basically Snatch on a stick for you, make a gold draw card. And the reason why you would want, for example, Strike Gold over Snatch specifically is because we talked about it, the estate. I think if you get a lot of gold, very early on against Gravy, he has no armor block. Most of them aren't playing any D reacts into you
Hmm.
because, or the only one that they're playing is the Soul Shield adjacent one, the red 0 for 4, maybe
Blood
zero
in the
for
water.
six. Yep, blood in the water. So it becomes much more appealing just to hit face, when especially all of a sudden when you're like, oh, all of a sudden I have 7 mites, and I'm attacking you for, especially if your card has on hits. Um, a lot of the cards that Gravy wants to play before he can play allies from his graveyard and stuff are attack actions, things like Blue Swell, Blue Murderous Rabble comes to mind, and another card that shuts that down completely is Crush the Weak, which is in the sideboard. You can't play base or 3 or less. And he's very bad at blocking a lot of the time. And what we realized is sometimes if you kind of aggro them out in the early and the mid game, all of a sudden they don't have enough room to set up this
Hmm.
insane combo. And then sometimes you can even just swap back into killing the allies at a later time, as long as you pressure their life total down enough in the beginning where they don't have infinite space to do whatever they want. Because if you just sit there and be like, oh, I'll kill 2 allies, pass, they're all of a sudden they get to the end game, they have 40 health, and at that point it's too late to go face. Whereas all these tech cards like performance bonus and specifically moving forward, I think Strike Gold is another Strike Gold Snapdragons combo is another very appealing thing, because like I said, what you want to do is basically get gold as fast as possible, and against Gravy, clashing most of the time isn't an option because a lot of the time they're just attacking you with allies, which I don't know
Hmm.
why LSS made it so you don't clash with allies, but I mean, it is what it is. So we got to play around it, be a little bit more sneaky with it.
And
And
furthermore, there's drawback because if they reveal an ally off the top, like that power counts against yours, right?
yeah, yeah. Most of the time you're still winning. I know people like to say, oh, well, he has high power. There's only really Swabby, Rigor Mortis, and
Humperdinck.
Humperdinck. Yep. So you're losing against those, but a lot of the time he's has so much gold anyways, so losing usually isn't that bad.
Hmm.
Um, and the one problem that I do think ultimately the more aggro face and then like kill a couple allies is the better line. It still has some drawbacks, like if they're able to, like for example, one time I played against teammate Austin, and the first turn of the game he had 18 cards in his graveyard. I said, how is this even possible? You literally saw a third of your deck in one turn.
Hmm.
So like those games you're probably still losing, and anytime that they can try and accelerate the game faster than you can, um you're going to definitely be behind. But another reason why like gold slash drawing cards is being aggressive, you kind of catch up in that way. Whereas like every time you make a gold, you're also drawing a card going through your deck faster to see go again, and or the Goldmane estate. And I think another consideration that you could play for the gravy matchup is, I'm not sure. I think it's called Cadaverous Contraband. I think it's a card we used to play in Jomai, the two for
Hmm.
6 in red. When it hits, you can put a non-attack on top. So all of a sudden, you're generating all this extra gold from these kind of seemingly unintuitive cards that you think would
Hmm.
be bad. Um, and you're turning it into raw damage against his face. And then, the next turn, you're also be like, oh, I'll kill the ally, take a turn off, draw the Goldmane estate next turn, and then also make 8 mites, for example, on the next turn. It's like,
Hmm.
just, I'm not sure how Vic or how Gravy will be able to compete if every turn you're, because like one of the strategies against Dromine in the very beginning was like for Guardian, it's like, okay, cool, you can play your dragons. I'm just gonna go with Red Thunder Quake Face 10, Red Thunder Quake Face 10. It's like
Hmm.
if you want to take damage to do your turn, in 2 turns you're at 20 health, and all of a sudden you have to consider blocking. And Dromai was also much easier to utilize all of her dragons on board, because just be like, play one
Yeah.
red card, attack with everything. Gravy does not have that luxury. He has to kind of jump through hoops and hurdles to get more go again attacks. So a lot of the times, like I said, he might have a bunch of allies on board, but most of them are not threatening you at all. So I think moving forward, if you're having trouble with that matchup, I think you should just go face and or include some of the cards I said. So either Strike Gold Snapdragon combo or um, Cadaverous Contraband. Or you could also try and lean into the more original Guardian stuff, like Zealous Belting and Anathos, for example, and stuff like that, because technically that is more damage Anathos face opposed to Little Hammer. But I think, in my mind, the best thing, like we were talking about, I think the best card in the deck is the Estate, and I think trying to enable that both as often as possible with the Contraband, as well as um, make it as powerful as you can with all these gold cards that generate gold fast as possible. I'm not sure if he'll be able to compete with that strategy.
Moving on to the rest of the sideboard here, Matt. Let's go with the one clash card that is here. It's Trounce. This is a card that I think most people that play Victor or pick him up early are gonna want to include in the main board. Why have you relegated it to the side?
We relegated it to the sideboard because some heroes you don't really want to clash twice against, because the odds sorry, of winning are or twice in a row are not in your favor. However, with that being said, it is still played in most matchups. So, for example, against Assassin, obviously everything's super low power. Um, where it comes out are some matchups where they have higher power things, and you kind of see the card adjacent to it, Staunch Response. It becomes much more appealing to play the D-React over Trounce because um, for example, one matchup that we were playing Staunch into over Trounce specifically was Puffin. So if you haven't played against Puffin, they have a lot of high power cards, and the chances of you winning 2 clashes in a row against Puffin are pretty low. Not zero, but pretty low. So we went with more the consistent route of, sideboarded out to be safe, because giving the opponent that wants golds to make cogs and stuff like that, and also giving them an extra pitch, it becomes much less appealing to play that card, as well as, things like Verdance, for example. You won't you will be winning clashes against Verdance. However, they won't be attacking you all that often. Most of the time they'll do one attack, and if it's one thing to take away in Victor is clash cards usually don't pair that well together. So the way that you kind of want them to line up, and sometimes, going back to, is Victor RNG? Yes, he's RNG of winning clashes, but it's also RNG of what order you draw your clashes and when you draw them. So if you end up drawing multiple clash cards in the same hand, usually it's bad, especially because um, let's say you crack a gold, you lose the first clash, and then you lose the second clash. There's no longer a way to change the top card of your deck. So you just lose both clashes, or you tie both clashes, and then all of a sudden, you're down a gold and you got no value for it. So in some matchups, you want less density of the non-revealing cards as well. So you just want the highest consistency to win, and that's one of the ones that it makes sense to cut it out, I think, because you have to win 2, and including it in your deck also lowers the chance that you'll win a clash, and the upside compared to Trounce as opposed to the Goldmane estate is just not there. So that's why it was put into the sideboard, basically.
Cool. And so we've talked about staunch response, but just to reiterate your point, like basically staunch response is kind of coming in situations where you don't want to be doing those double clashes, or you think it's a lower probability to win. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. And quick before we move on, Staunch, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is also, especially in my weekend, was one of the biggest outlier cards that everyone that Victor lists I see are not including Staunch, and I don't know why they aren't. The card's OP. Um, so it's OP against Assassin. One thing we kept getting blown out by Assassin is they're so heavy on attack reacts. Sometimes you'd be like, no blocks, and you're just like, okay, well, I'm gonna make my thing with no on hit, or an on hit that you thought you didn't care about. It's like all of a sudden it's for 15 or 10, 12, and you Guardian kind of can't afford to take 12 damage like that, because eventually it'll get to the spot where, well, I'm just gonna hold an attack reaction in your hand and eventually kill you. Where Staunch, bails you out in that regard, as well as we thought both the other two new heroes, Marlin and Puffin, would be more popular than they were. Um, and this card also not destroys, but it's very, very high value in those matchups because they're attacking with huge attacks. It also gets value in the Guardian Mirror. It also gets value against Azalea. They spend a whole turn, especially. It's kind of weird because the Azaleas are not sideboarding like you have defense reactions.
Mm.
because most lists aren't, and sometimes they kind of go all in to do one ginormous attack, and you're just like, okay, I'll block with a card and play Red Staunch for block 13,
Right.
and they're like, but my whole turn.
Yep.
So I think this card is very good, and I'd be shocked if it's not in most lists moving forward, I think.
Enough of this blocking stuff. Let's go into the more juicy power cards for you. We got 2 Pummels, not 3 red, but only 2 here. Why are we pulling punches on Pummel?
The two kind of worked with how we wanted the sideboard, which was add 8 cards. So you add 2 3 ofs and a 2 of. So depending on the matchup, we want, some matchups you want all the 2 ofs because they're all kind of aggressive cards. If you look at them, it's Pummel, Pulverize, and Rouse the Ancients.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the reason why we only chose to include 2 Pummels is we couldn't justify playing it in the main board because we want to win, clashes as much as possible. Shocker, Pummel does not win clashes.
Mm.
And Pummel also, as much as the Vigors help enable Pummel plays as well as the 4/8s, it's best not to be like, well, I need a Vigor on this turn to basically enable my Pummel turn. So having 3 of them in the deck without the Tunic kind of just doesn't make sense because you're kind of playing towards a more so the way that we described how playing Pummel would be is like I'm a little bit kind of behind this matchup and we think we're not winning. So we're going to put the surprise factor slash the high roll potential of, well, I'm going to CNC pummel you and get like insane value that way, or, pummel any other card in the game and it just gets insane value. So this is kind of one of the few cards that Guardian can tech into as a comeback mechanic, as weird as that sounds, as well as just being good when you want to be the aggressor as well and you're given more space. But most of the time, those rolls are not the one that Guardian is the best at playing, which is why it's one, not in the main board, and two, it's only as a 2 of because there's only specific scenarios slash heroes that you play against in which you would want to run it.
The last aggressive 2 of is Pulverize, the 10 cost, 14 power Guardian attack with Heave 3. And when it hits a hero, not crushes a hero, it's a common misconception with this card. When it hits a hero, the first attack during their next turn has -4.
Another card no one's playing. We're not overcooking. This card is OP. I'm telling you, this card is OP. People are like, how are you beating Verdance? I attack him for 14. The Verdance that I beat in Swiss, he got attacked for 20 with Pulverize. He is not very happy. Yeah, but in all honesty, this card is very just kind of we just realized that it was good in general. So a lot of the time, like you block with a Trounce, and then all of a sudden this card is enabled, and you can attack for 15 and stuff like that. And another thing that it enables is one, the Rouse combo. So usually this is coming in with the Rouse, so you can 1 card reveal if you want to. And another reason why this card is just so OP is Guardian usually wants to go second in most matchups because you want a free turn to just say, respect my crush effect, respect my crush effect. So going first is like a huge, usually pretty big debuff for Guardian, depending on, the context of your hand. However, if you go first and say, make a seismic surge with Tectonic and heave Pulverize, and then next turn block 6 and attack for 14, it becomes much more appealing to go first. So this card is like the ultimate go first card.
Mm.
And for example, one of the games I played against an Azalea, I was like, yeah, I'll go first. I'll heave this, pass, and he attacks. I block with 2 cards. I attack for 14. I get his whole hand next turn. He's like, well, I don't want to keep any cards to attack because I can't block out 14. And if I keep any cards to attack, he's like, I'll attack for 2. And then it's like, if you go into that scenario, they attack for 2. And he's like, oh, perfect. I have a clash card to block with. Block with my clash card, win the clash, draw a card, make a gold.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm surprised that more lists aren't playing this card because just how we realized how OP it was. Not really OP, but it's just very, very good in the scenarios that it's good. And the drawback of there's not really a drawback other than it being red. As well as it also just says I auto win any clash. There's no hero in the
Mm.
game that can beat 14. So even in the Guardian mirror, they can't win unless they got their own Pulverize.
And you did play a number of Guardians, like an absurd number considering how many were actually there. But we'll go over that in a second. Skipping over performance bonus because we've already touched on that. Let's go with the 2 remaining. Actually, the only 2 crush cards in the inventory. We've already kind of alluded to these crush cards in the sideboard as toolkit pieces, kind of like Azalea's arrows, if you are familiar with that. Let's actually start with Chokeslam, because we've got the blues in the main board, so this one is a little more alluring to my eye. Talk to me about Chokeslam and its position currently.
So Chokeslam is very good when it's good and very useless when it's bad, hence why it's in the sideboard. And it's also very easy to know when you should play it or not. It's like you should ask yourself, a 2-question chart. Does my opponent's power or attacks gain power? Yes. Okay, I should play this card. And this specifically has to be attack action cards, so it's less appealing against Warrior as a whole.
Mm.
However, one class that it completely demolishes is Assassin. So Assassin has to heavily respect this card, or all their attack reactions are blanked. Another hero that just completely destroys is Azalea. Azalea wants to play a bunch of 2-block pump cards. They want to shoot one big arrow, either with Dominate or without, and kind of outvalue that way. This card just says you have to respect and give me 2 cards. I'm trying to think if I'm missing any. Puffin was another one. Puffin slash Marlin, another reason why we
Yep.
thought those heroes were more powerful and deserved more representation than they got, honestly. This card is also very good against them because Puffin wants to gain power with cogs and or some of the 1-for-4 pump cards if they're playing them. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. And Puffin, obviously, I think there was 2 kind of builds that we had cooked up. One was like a heavy harpoon deck. This one, obviously shuts down the weapon ability as well as any pumps they're playing. And the other list that was very popular was kind of Death Dealer or Jason Azalea with things like trying to play basically like old Lexi was, where you're trying to abuse cards like Rain Razors and Bolt and Shot. And Bolt and Shot and Rain Razors becomes much less appealing when your cards can't gain power. It's like I'll attack and not have go again and pass. So this card is just like a huge role player when it's good, and like it's not doesn't when it doesn't get any value, it just stays in the sideboard basically.
Mm-hmm. Next is another one that has kind of a narrow scope. It's Crush the Weak. And Crush the Weak is one that kind of like waxes and wanes in popularity with Guardians in general. This is one that on Crush makes it so the player that was crushed can't play attack action cards with 3 or less base power during their next action phase. This one strikes me as yet another assassin hate card in a lot of cases, which makes me wonder, are you running both this and Chokeslam into those assassin matchups?
Yes, both are good into assassin, so you play both. It's kind of just that simple, basically. Um, but yeah, this is another very good one against assassin. I talked about it briefly earlier, but it also hits a lot of gravy attacks. So that's kind of like the 2 matchups that are off the top of my head of why you would want to play this card so much. And with all the assassins, I think being in a playable state, especially before new LL'd, so you have 3 assassins running around that are all very high power level. We thought that this was a good include. Now moving forward, I think this might be one of the cards that gets cut for some different hate, because I think the assassins are also going to have to adapt their decks as well to combat gravy, because a lot of the games that I saw, for example, the non-new assassins were struggling
Mm.
heavily into dealing with gravy bones. So this might be. I think this is probably in the sideboard that I can see the first one that comes to my mind as being the first cuttable card for either your own spice or something to counteract things in your local meta.
And so, just to clarify, the reason you're thinking about cutting it because of its relation to Assassin is just that they are kind of down bad because of Gravy Bones, and they're gonna have to over tech for Gravy, so maybe you can afford to not tech as hard for them.
That, and we also thought the assassin matchup. Now, granted, we were playing all this hate for assassins, so we thought it was a good matchup.
Mm.
If you start cutting things like this, it might become a much closer matchup. But like I said before, assassin is one of the heroes that you win almost every clash into. So all of a sudden, if you're winning every single clash, the deck just becomes insane. So it's less appealing to win more in a matchup rather than tech for the hero that you think you're either like very close into. Like I think Gravy is probably pretty close, even though I think most people in their minds think Gravy is insanely favored or whatever. I don't
Mm.
think that's the case.
And that rounds out the sideboard, Matt. It's a beautiful lady that you brought to US Nats. Let's go ahead and start taking a look at exactly how you did with it. At Nats, we can also review matchups from the Battle Hardened and whatnot, and I will very much want to be doing that. But first, we're going to proceed over to the National Championship metagame breakdown for 2025. This is what showed up to Las Vegas in combination with our team and awesome players from all over the country. First thing I want to note is that there are only 13 Guardians in this entire pool. And only 5 of them are Victor, which means that even with you and Chris Iali, we're talking about less than 1% of the entire meta was on Victor Goldmane. So I want to go a little more in depth into exactly why you thought that Victor was a good pick for the field that we see before us.
I mean, honestly, I'm just looking at this picture. I'm like, damn, we made the right choice. I see Florian number 1. Low key, that deck sucks. That deck sucks. Just block. You keep blocking. They get to the end game. They have like 3 blue cards that they can play, and your blue cards are better, and you kind of cheat the game out in the end game. Syndra, I did end up losing to a Syndra in Swiss, unfortunately. However, I think the matchup is slightly leaning towards Victor favored because she has a similar thing as the Assassins. All the Clash cards are online all the time, so you kind of, as long as they don't clump together, you're usually pulling ahead just off straight value as well as presenting a little bit of on hits. I kind of skipped over it before, but this is also one of the matchups where Crush the Weak becomes much more appealing because, they're kind of playing head jab deck, and all of a sudden, if they have to block with their block 2 head jabs, it becomes much, much more appealing, to win that matchup. Azalea, I think that matchup is very good, especially with the inclusion of Staunch Response, especially since most of them aren't expecting it. It's kind of like a blowout factor where they might go all in to try and dominate, kill you, and you're just like, okay, I'll live with Staunch. Prism, we talked about briefly, but like I said, I think you're beating most Prism players. Um, Even like I think most people will, might argue with you and say like, oh, the highest level Prism players will beat you, which I think if they have the right deck construction, they will. However, a lot of the most recent deck constructions that I've seen, even the ones that have top 8, have cut a lot of the cards that are good against you. So even if they know what they're doing and know the deck inside out, I think the chances of them winning are still, I think you're still slightly favored in that. Uh, Arachne, with the inclusion of like not getting blown out by attack reactions. Um, I think that matchup is slightly favored. It can kind of be tricky depending on what flips he has because um, sometimes the flips are just insane value with the dagger build, and he also has a decent amount of D-reacts to combat your crush effects. New, unfortunate, bad matchup, I think, but of the top 5 heroes we've gone through so far, this is the first bad matchup.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still, at the same time, it's not bad matchup unwinnable. It is bad matchup winnable. Gravy Bones. I think most lists were probably pretty unrefined, even though Chris ended up losing to 2. One of them was Brody. I forgot who the other guy he played was, but I'm assuming another pretty refined list. And I think part of the reason why he struggled and was because we weren't quite sure what the game plan was. So what, like I was talking in the beginning of the pod, we originally thought that fatigue was the best answer. However, moving forward, I think face is the place basically, and
Mm.
threatening life total is better, which I think with a switch of game plan, it might sway the matchup more than you might think. Arachne, it's similar to the other, or Mario, or sorry, not Mario. Slippy is similar to the Mario matchup. You kind of win all your clashes and try and, as long as they're not clumped up, you get insane value and usually are winning. Kano, you're getting blown up, unlucky. Vincet, I ended up playing a Vincet. Guardian is just naturally very good against Vincet because it's very hard for her to set up to actually deal damage to you. So in this matchup, usually you're just kind of sitting there blocking a lot and making your opponent win the game, which is, for most people, probably not the most fun way to play Flesh and Blood. But I think against her, it's the best strategy you have. And when you're kind of given space, you attack her and try and deny her from setting up, which ended up working out for me. Fang is kind of, I think, a difficult matchup, even though on paper it seems like it wouldn't be because, you're winning all your clashes. I think this kind of depends on how your opponent's deck is constructed, as well as at the same time how starved for fealty they are. Like, for example, I played Mara Ferris in the Battle Harden,
Mm-hmm.
and she chose one to run non-Valiant Dynamo boots, which probably if she ran Valiant Dynamo would have won her the game, but she wanted the insurance of saying, "Oh, 20 blade this turn," basically.
Mm.
But she was kind of starved a little bit for fealty in the beginning, and I kind of just outvalued her because she had to pitch cards and stuff like that. So if Feng has a slow start, you can win. However, I think it might be slightly unfavored. Both wizards, Verdance, I think, with the current deck construction has the slight edge on you, and I think this is going to be the matchup that moving forward. I think Verdance obviously winning U.S. Nationals, she's going to go up very highly, and this is one of the matchups that needs the most work. And I'm not off the top of my head, like I don't have very good solutions to how the matchup should be or could be, improved upon. So that would be one that you guys are gonna have to figure out in your own. Um, Acilio, it turns out that only having AB1 most of the time is kind of a buff because they attack you with so many attack actions.
Yeah.
You also get a clash against them. So it's kind of weird where they're like adjacent to Runeblade and you get a win clashes and basically outvalue them that way. The other two heavy hitter heroes, I ended up playing a KO, which I kind of basically fatigued them. I think if you're not playing Cast Bones and KO, like a Guardian, especially the staunch response came in clutch in that matchup, and specifically that he kind of couldn't get over the value of just blocking. Basically, Kasai is a weird one where she has a lot of the payoffs, or she has a similar payoff card to you, where she wants gold to um, make a bunch of goons, but I think it's much harder for her to make gold than it is for you. So a lot of the time you're kind of just trading with your block cards, attacking with your big guardian cards. And if you get online with Goldmanes in the early game, you're kind of destroying her. And if you get a slow start, then you're probably going to lose. So you're a little bit unfavored into Kasai, but I kind of expect Kasai to dwindle down a little bit, I would assume, because she is not very good in the Wizards, in my humble opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the heroes, I don't want to go into all of them specifically, but I think he was favored into most of the heroes on the top, and as well as most of the heroes who had relatively low representation. So I think overall for U.S. nationals and/or nationals moving forward, Victor is definitely a reasonable pick, especially if you consider, like for example, let's say moving forward with this exact breakdown, let's say all 30 people who played new go to Verdance. So Verdance now has 49 players and moves up to the second most played deck. You're running into a similar field in which I played in. If you think about it, it's like I was unfavored in a new, unfavored in a Verdance, combine the two numbers, 49, and I still had a great showing. And I think
Mm.
that he's still favored into a lot of the other heroes besides those two.
So was this by and large what you and the rest of the team were expecting? Was there anything here, perhaps like if you were to see this graphic before choosing your deck, that might give you pause?
No, I think it's kind of funny. For those who don't know, me and Chris started. I think it was, yeah, we both started at 2 or 3-0, and I think Chris ended up losing on stream. But after the second round, he goes up to me and he says, and I quote, "Have you seen the meta breakdown?" And I said, "No, why?" And he says, "We are so up right now." And it's like that's how he described the meta breakdown for us as well. So that I think that's how it sums up how it went. We are so up right now with the current meta breakdown and distribution of heroes.
Well, let's take a look more specifically, Matt, at how up you were. Round one, Victor Mirror. There were only 5 of you in the entire room of I forget 517 players, I want to say, and you found one another. And you have the tech sauce. You've got the Pulverize in the sideboard, ready to win a free clash. How did that one go?
Yeah, so unfortunate for the four Guardians, I had to play over the weekend. They had to play one of the guys with the most experience in the matchup. Unlucky. Um, but a lot of people, I saw people posting in the Discord and whatnot, is like, how are you winning this matchup in particular? Like, not necessarily Gravy, but as well as the other Guardians with only the Clash Hammer that loses power, which I have a funny story later on. But the crazy thing is, especially in the Victor versus Victor, you do not want to be attacking with your hammer. Like that
Mm,
is not what you want to be doing unless you specifically have Zell's belting and Anethos. Then all of a sudden it becomes much more appealing to swing with, those two cards in particular, which you only have 3 of in your whole deck. And most of the time you just want to say big guardian attack, big guardian attack. Um, So having the little hammer does not matter like nearly as much as people think it does, as well as the double gold combo is just OP in the mirror because a lot of the time it's a point game. So and one card that we keep talking about, the estate, it just breaks the point game, and you're like, okay, if you end up winning clashes, which Pulverize helps with as well, you're like, oh well, I'm gonna get more value than you. And another card that really helped me in the Guardian Mirrors as well was Staunch Response. So, for example, later on when I played Jarl in round 5, um, kind of one of the big no-nos I think in the Guardian Mirror is just taking a bunch of damage because you think your hand's good, because you can always get punished for your hand. So, for example, my opponent he takes 11 damage to go Oakenold Fuse, and I'm like, okay,
Oh
block
no.
3, and he's like Pummel for the 14. I'm like, okay, play Staunch block. Or Pummel, yeah, Pummel the 13. I was like block 13, and I was like, oh, so you just trade, and I was like, okay, hammer for 4. So the Guardian Beer is like, it's a weird one where like you don't want to get super greedy. So like if your hand's bad, just block, and even if you think your hand's good, sometimes you just block.
Words to live by, I'm sure. You've already kind of touched on the KO matchup, so we'll gloss over that one. The one I'm interested in is the first one you've hit where you kind of feel like you were unfavored. That's round 3 against Verdance.
Yeah, so I flip up, and like we were talking about, I think the Waning Moon list is becoming much more popular to play, which is ended up what I played against. So the AB1 at the same time was not the biggest downside. Like I said, I think if they have Aether Tide and you have AB1, you kind of get like Giga blown up. And this game, however, he had Windy Moon, so like we flip over equipment, and I'm like, yes, I'm not completely unfavored, and probably can't win the game at all. Um, and I kind of just get a good start where Verdance to decompose a lot of the time has to attack, and a lot of their highest value plays, like I talked about earlier, are all their attack actions. It's kind of like old Icelander, where it's like, well, I can either attack for 8 physical, or I can shoot you for 6 arcane, or 5 arcane, depending on what their hand context is. And most of the time, they're going to pick the physical. However, if they see you have AB1, they might choose the latter and deny you your clash
Mm,
cards. But you can definitely win the matchup. And how I won the matchup was he asked forced to attack me because he wants to play his Fellions and stuff. And I'm like, okay, block my clash cards, make gold, and then just hit face. In this game, I remember I pulverized him for 20, and he's like, okay, I'll block 3 cards from my hand, play a potion, and all of a sudden, he's down 12 health just off that one turn cycle. Um, and I ended up kind of scamming him away with the Golden Sun. So it's like adjacent to overpower and just killed him because he couldn't combo me. It was very close in the end because he was like Strider's Waning Moon with Burn Bear, and I went down to like 3 health, I think it was, or 2 health.
mm,
So, but this is also one of the matchups where Pummel is like very, very crucial, especially because a lot of the time they're arsenaling D-Reacts. That's usually, I think, for the most part, besides like another like duped felling or felling the crown when it's not online, um, D-React is the highest thing to put in their arsenal. So if you ever CNC pummel them, they're kind of just getting blown out,
mm,
and they don't have um, Crown of Providence into you because they need the Earth Helmet in case or for their combo basically. So that's one of the matchups where, like I was talking about, the pummel is kind of like the high roll I'm behind in this matchup. I need to get ahead and or be able to utilize my hand, because a lot of the time Verdance is setting up into you. She's like, I'm going to play healing potion, pass or go. And if you look at your hand and you can't do anything with it, you're obviously going to be losing. But this is why I was also talking. I personally did not play performance bonus in this matchup. However, I could see maybe it becoming playable. As I just say, hey, give me a card at the start of the turn, basically, and then I'm going to play my big attack.
right.
So all of a sudden, if you go performance bonus for 3, they block 3 because they don't want. Obviously, they're going to block 3. Um, and then you're like debilitate or choke slam or CNC. All of a sudden, they can't play the felling that they're holding on to because they don't have no armor to block with and stuff like that. So I think this matchup is definitely behind, but for me, I kind of lucked out in the sense that I high rolled with basically making gold early, and then also chaining that into the golden estates into big attack, and eventually they die.
Yeah, I almost want to mention, like, there's a concept in Flesh and Blood. I'm gonna call it churn, um, where like the decks that run power cards that draw cards, I'm thinking of Brute with Blood Rush Bellows. I'm thinking of Lexi back in the day with Three of a Kind, where you're just kind of like churning through your deck all the time. Just inherently means you're going to find those power cards again and again faster than your opponent can kind of enact their game plan. And Victor kind of strikes me as one of the heroes that does that, just because every time he creates a gold token, he's drawing cards, he's moving through his deck faster. So it almost seems like when you're mentioning the high roll of like finding the Goldmane estates and stuff like that, it is kind of just looped into how the deck functions ultimately. Do you feel like that is almost like an appeal of the deck?
Yeah, I think for sure it kind of describes this what you just described. Um, this matchup is kind of a little bit different because you're not playing all the clash cards, but
Mm-hmm.
you definitely notice like that specific effect that you're talking turning through your deck. Especially when you're running all the clash gold cards in specific, so Trounce and Test of Strength, as well as so you have Test of Strength, you have Trounce, you have the Fabled, you have um the estate, and also you have anytime you win a clash with the Golden Sun. So all of a sudden,
Mm-hmm.
you're going through your deck faster than your opponent. You're seeing your power cards faster. Whether it be any red guardian attack when you're winning clashes and you just gotta get 2 card attack them, or the estate. So yeah, that's another reason why Victor is, in my opinion, very appealing, because it's like, oh, I got to see all these, all my power cards mostly every game as well. So
Mm-hmm.
combine like the turning aspect as well as being in my opinion, a high block deck. Um, just because like all your cards block 3, you have a bunch of armor, so most of the time you're living for a long time, even if you're losing. So that gives you the chance to turn the corner and draw things that bail you out. One of them being the estate in the late game, or like in the end of the middle game, kind of, where you have a bunch of gold stacked up and you're behind, and then all of a sudden, you draw your 1 or 2 Goldmane estates and you just flip the game on the head and win from there.
Is that one of the is that one of like the skill gaps between a beginning guardian player and a seasoned guardian player, that thing you're talking about where you can like getting comfortable playing from behind and just throwing your cards in front of your opponent's offense until the opportune moment?
Yeah, so one thing that I always thought was funny is every time Majin Bey talks about his decks, he's all like, "This deck sucks. Wizard sucks. Wizard sucks." You guys want to know what really sucks? Guardian with 4 blues in your hand. What the hell are you gonna do with that? Unless you, and it's like you just kind of block, and then it's like, so all of a sudden your opponent has a suboptimal turn, and you're like, oh, I have some space to play my red crusher card, and then they have to respect your red crush card, and it kind of just chains. So Guardian's in the weird sense where a lot of the time you're kind of just blocking, waiting either for a good hand that's very good, Victor, and specifically two winning clashes to draw extra cards, so you can block with more cards than you would in any other hero because you have extra ones to block with and also utilize on offense. Um, I forgot where I was going. Sorry. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Majin
Sorry.
Bay, Wizard sucks, yada yada, cards
Yeah,
good.
Guardian sucks. Block. And so you have extra cards to block with / use on offense. So
So after Swiss on day one, you have I think the most mid draft performance ever, because 3-3, so it's straight down the middle, which means
yeah,
that there is a lot of pressure on day two's Classic Constructed, which unfortunately didn't completely go your way. You went 2-2. First round was against yet another Guardian. This is the third Guardian you've seen just at U.S. Nationals, and it happens to be the guy that you conned into bringing the deck with you, Chris Ayali. And just a quick anecdote about this match. I came over to the floor to watch Austin Summers versus Andrew Cook on Prism, who ended up being in top 8. And I am disturbed all of a sudden. I'm like zeroed in on this game. All of a sudden, I hear like 2 very familiar laughs, like bellowing over all of the top tables. And it's you and Chris sitting across from each other, having probably the best time of anyone at the top tables. Tell me a little bit about that match.
I mean, I was having a great time. Chris was losing every clash, but I don't know. We had a fun time. Neither of us were super experienced in the Victor Mirror, but like I said, I think I've hundreds of more reps than Chris in the Guardian Mirror, so like it kind of shows in that. But I think there's a couple highlight moments from that match, and one of them is like all of our opponents next to us, and like I remember people on our right were getting deck checked, and they're like, "Man, I wanted to play against Victor," and I was like, Come on, guys. Come on. He's not that bad. He's good, guys. He's good. I'm telling you. And then it's like the other standout moment is the very first clash of the game. I'm like, Chris, should I block with this? Because I know I'm kind of playing a more friendly game than I would against a random person that I don't know. And he's like, yeah, block with it. And I block with my Tester Strength and I reveal Pulverize off the top. And I'm just like screaming on the top of my lungs that I won a clash. And everybody's, looking at like, I think it was like table, I don't know, 12 or 14 or something at that point. Everyone's like, what the hell is going on over there? So that
It
was just
was
another funny moment. But that's, if I had to describe that match in one thing, that's just how I would describe it. Chris kind of got like the low end of the Victor, what you were talking about, like the Clash RNG. So I kind of just won every clash, including the ones that he was playing against me, which sometimes, in specifically the Victor versus Victor Guardian match goes. Sometimes a lot of it's out of your control. It's like, well, I have to play the clash cards, specifically Test of Strength slash. You don't play Trounce in this matchup,
hmm.
um, but you just have to play it because your opponent's probably going to play them, and whoever gets more gold fast enough can abuse the estate and win. Basically, is how this matchup went for us.
It was really fun. It brought a certain amount of levity that you don't expect at the top tables of a day two multi-day, multi-format for that matter event with such high prestige. And it reminded me why the AG Pro Team is something a little particularly special in the world of Flesh and Blood teams. As a side note, I do want to ask you before we move on, like you and Chris are some of the tightest teammates that we have on the team, and I just wonder like where does that camaraderie come from, and what is your guys' history together in terms of card games?
Well, this is the only like I first got introduced to Chris through the Age Pro team, but I kind of realized like how dedicated and committed he was to like how I would describe him. Like I wouldn't describe every player on our team, for example, as striving to be literally the best player they can be and win every
Mm,
single event. But Chris is that person, which I think is kind of what drew me to him is like the competitive nature of I want to win, and he's also very good at. He's kind of like two faced in the sense where he can we're testing for a big event. He can be like, oh, I want to win as much as possible. What's the best deck? What should we play and stuff? And then, the next minute, be chill and laid back and, be your friend at the end of the day, not necessarily, testing only competitive teammates, which is why I think, I respect him probably the most of any player on our team. It's just because he does that so well, better than, anyone else I've known, I think.
well, how fun that you guys got to share a ridiculous clashing matchup in day two. Then
Yeah. Their side story, not to get too sidetracked, but I remember Chris, one of the times he was streaming, he's like, he pulled up some random Magic tracker. I don't know anything about Magic, but I guess there's like all the database, and he's showing me this one guy that he's lost to like 5 times at different events. I was like, I'm hoping, years down the line, he's just gonna be looking at me. He's like, oh, I lost to this guy 5 times. Come on now.
somebody get on making that fab tracker so we can make that happen. So next up, Matt, round 13, you finally hit the dreaded matchup that we were hoping to dodge the entire weekend. That's new. Um, was it close? Was it winnable this one?
Life totals were close, but it kind of went. I'll describe this one, and I played another one in the Battle Hardened besides the Hamilton game. It was close until it wasn't. And what I mean by that is I told you I think this matchup kind of mainly revolves around the estate and how much value you get from it. And, most of the time you can protect it and you kind of try and protect it at all costs in your hand and stuff. However, the one card you can't protect it against is Siren Skull.
Hmm.
And in this game and in the other game, in the Battle Hardened I played, they just Siren called naturally and hit the estate
Hmm.
twice. And all of a sudden, when you only have one estate left to win the game, it becomes incredibly more difficult. So that's kind of how that game went. I think the life totals, it was, single digit to single digit, but in reality, I had 8 Guardian blue cards he could have played in my banish zone. So, for the rest of the game, he was just going to be blocking, activate new, attack for 8, attack for 8, attack for 8, which is sometimes how this matchup goes. Now, in particular, I think if I got to resolve 2 of those, the 2 that he stole the estates from me, I think it would have been much closer and I might have even won. Like I said, this matchup's not completely unwinnable, but it is very unfavored, I think.
Especially considering that even when you do resolve the Goldmane estate, I mean, they're still an assassin, so they have tools to disrupt you and make it so that it's
Yep.
really hard to send an attack.
Yep.
Next up is Vincet. You've already mentioned how you feel about this matchup, and I'm assuming you enacted your fatigue game plan.
Yeah, it was fatigue slash like pivoted into fatigue. So like you kind of trade with them in the beginning while they're setting up, and then you kind of just block on the turns after their setup. So for example, I remember in this game he double called me on one turn, which was like his huge setup, and then I blocked with a clash card, another card, drew another card, and I was able to block again with effectively with the card that I drew off the top. Um, so even though that they have like this kind of combo potential, it's very hard for them to set up while you have damage. Basically, it's like the similar concept of the gravy, how I was describing, where you hit them, they're taking a little bit of damage from blood debt to set up, and then all of a sudden they're too low when they want to do the thing that they want to do. So that's how I would describe that. Favorite type or favorite blocking, and then attack when your hand makes sense to attack. Basically, like so when you have a on hit effect or you draw an extra card from a clash card, that's your turn. That's your chance to attack.
The final game comes up. It's round 15, Syndra, which you generally feel good into. At this point, you are dead for top 8, as we've discussed before we went not live, but before we started recording here. And also, there's something else that's on the line here, Matt. It's probably a competition that is way more important than U.S. Nationals. It's the age-old competition of the better Vore brother, because there's two of you that are masterful flesh and blood players. And in this case, I'm looking at the standings right now. Alexander Vore comes in at 13th with 11 wins. Matthew Vore comes in at 33rd with 10 wins, one behind that pesky brother of yours.
He got me this time. He got me this time.
and your age-old competition is probably what makes you guys such good players, honestly. But after digressing, let's go back to round 15. What happened in the Syndra matchup, and do you think there's anything you could have done to shore it up?
This matchup went 1-1, and it was just very close game that I ended up losing. And I don't remember specifically anything that I could have done overly different that made much sense at the time with the information that I had. I kind of just got the thing we've been describing, the little bit of the unlucky clash RNG. Not necessarily that I lost the clashes because I won all the clashes I did have against them, but it was like the double-edged sword of having too many clash cards, which is one of the scenarios that I described that can happen with Victor. So I remember one of the turns in the late game, I ended up drawing three. I drew double Trounce Test of Strength,
Mm.
and like I said, the cards get the best value when they're used one at a time. So you want one on every single turn. Ideally, sometimes it doesn't line up like that, and you're fine blocking with two on the same turn because you can still make 2 gold. You just only draw one card, which you have to remember. And I think if just those cards were spaced out a little bit differently, I would have eked out the win. But my opponent played well, and he also had uh, 9 D-reacts against me as well. So he's like kind of not like it was obviously slanted aggro, but he kind of had this mid-range package. It was kind of described as what kind of eked out the win, which was it's pretty not standard. And combine that with the little bit of unlucky clash RNG, I was not able to win. But the crazy thing is, I still almost won the game, and I had that like terrible hand basically. And the thing is that might not be apparent is I'm describing that you want one clash card per hand. And if they're all clumped in your same hand, it's also reducing the chances of you drawing like future classes or,
Mm-hmm.
in my case, specifically because it was in the end of the game, it lowered the chances or like I had no chance of drawing any clash cards for, like 3 or 4 hands in a row, which is usually how you need to beat Syndra because they attack, you deny the mask, with your first clash card and then you block with another card and then you go like Spinal Crush and that avenue just wasn't open to me, just because they were clumped up like that. So it ended up costing me the game.
So that's the end of your U.S. Nationals tournament run. I do want to harken back to a different new matchup that you had before we leave this slide, and that was in the Battle Hardened when you were fighting for your life. You were really close to the top 8 cut, and you pair into Michael Hamilton on new Alluring Desire. There are two things I want to touch on in this match because I watched a portion of it towards the end, specifically when life totals were really close, and I thought you actually had a shot here. And the reason that I thought you had a shot was because you had this insane turn. And I wonder if you can just walk it back for me. It just as a reminder, it's the one with the 3 vigors.
Yeah, I know. So on the turn, on the turn, I have 4 cards in my hand, right? So this is just shows you the power of why Victor is OP, or
Mm-hmm.
not OP. Why Victor is good and why you should give him a shot and play him, and why I think he's actually a real contender. So I'm pretty out of the game. He stole one of my estates, and I kind of made a slight misplay earlier on in the game where I was hit with my own choke slam and I kept a CNC and attacked for 6. I didn't see the line. Yeah, typical Guardian player doesn't even know what his own cards do. Um, I didn't see the line of just swinging with my hammer to proc all my mites, which it would have procced like I described earlier.
Mm.
Um, so I kind of missed some points there. It was like I think it was 3 points of damage, which cost me the game in the end. But the very turn that you're describing, like I said, I have 4 cards in my hand. It's Clash of Vigor and Test of Strength, the Golden Sun, and Rouse the Ancients. And we're at our pitch deck at this point, and I go block with Clash of Vigor. We clash. It reveals Wall Up. I make 2 Vigors because I win the Clash of Vigor and I win with Wall Up. And then I block with Test of Strength. I win again. I make a gold. I make a 3rd Vigor token. I draw a card. I block with another card that turn. And then I go off 3 Vigors. I reveal the Golden Sun and another blue. And I play Rouse for 7 go again. Mind you, Michael Hamilton's at like 3 health at this point.
Ugh.
So he's kind of getting screwed. Sorry, it wasn't the Golden Sun. It was Red Choke Slam.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at my hand. I'm just seeing. I remember this because I was just sitting there with both cards revealed. I'm thinking. I'm like, huh. Well, I guess might as well attack him for 8. So I'm like, then one of the. It's like high tide basically. I was describing the limited experience of the set. I was like, crack a gold, draw a blue, play this for 8. Hope you got all chi in your hand. And he's like, block 6. And then next turn he's like, attack me for 8 from my graveyard. Or banish zone. And it's like after that it was kind of over. But I thought that was like the power level of that hand is like it's where you put a bunch of trash together and it works, kind of. It's like all the blue Guardian cards. It's like, oh, it's like, yeah. But so if you want to do the math on that turn, so it's like I blocked for 3, or I blocked for 10, and then I attacked for 15. So 4 card 25, little bit of value, little bit of value.
Yeah, I've recently, as everybody knows, have become a little warrior pilled. So I'm shivering in my boots at like, oh, I'm just over here refreshing my dynamos, and meanwhile Matt's going 4 card 25, and I'm like, I've got the value. The second thing I wanted to talk about in that match, what was that mistake? Because I remember you talking with Hamilton afterwards, and you guys coming to the consensus that that was a misplay. You've already kind of talked about it here. You just had an opportunity to make use of might tokens by swinging a Miller's Grindstone instead of a CNC, which after being under the crush effect of a choke slam, which would have meant that you get more damage out of the might tokens, but instead you got none. Anything more you
Yes.
want to say on that?
I also got unlucky on that. So although I did misplay, That choke slam was not there. And then he's like, activate new banish blue choke slam. I'm all like,
Oh,
fuck. See, I think the problem was I tilted because I was like, of course Hamilton hits the blue choke
yep.
slam. He's got plot armor. And then he's like, obviously he's gonna attack with it. I just gave it to him already. I was like, yeah, I know you're gonna attack with it. Come on now. Uh, so yeah, I just didn't see the line of attacking with the hammer. Probably because I think I was tilted. I was like, of course he hits the best
Yeah.
card, literally the only card that I care about. So
That's why he's the best guy in the world, right?
that's why he's the best.
All right, Matt. So last segment before I let you go. You've been very generous with your time, so thank you for that. Let's go back to the deck. We've
Mm-hmm.
had a massive change, specifically for Guardian. New Alluring Desire, gone. No more Siren's Call, baby. No more people ripping your Goldmane estates out of your hands. So let's go ahead and hit this edit button, and let's take a look at some new options that may have opened up for Guardian. I want to start the discussion first in the blues, but I tend to think that you won't have much to say about this because our overall strategy was to just not hit news.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any more blues you'd play because New's gone. Like Shocker, if you're looking at the deck, they're all the high power Guardian blues,
Mm-hmm.
which for the most part is pretty standard. Um, So I'm not. Some people are playing Terra Sunder, which I think is okay. It becomes much more appealing if you're playing like Enthos, but it kind of, in my opinion, does not usually make sense with Miller's Grindstone deck. So I think this is probably off the chopping block, and I think you should only consider it if you have Anethos. Another consideration we had was like Boulder Drop, just for one of the Might payoff cards, um, as well as pairing it with CNC. Is it actually good? I'm not sure. The other blue I think we were considering is Battlefront Bastion, which helps you a lot in the assassin matchup again. So if you're struggling with assassin, I would probably include this card in your deck. And you're like, well, what makes this card so good? It allows you to block a dagger as well as prevent the flick knife's effect. So a lot of the time Mario gets his highest value turns from flicking the graphene, I think it's called, the stealth dagger, and then
Mm-hmm.
double pinging with the Mario effect or the Mario flip effect. So this kind of just shores up that. And I think that we considered Ripple away for a little bit, but I think not really what you want to be doing. I think it also only is 4, so you might lose clashes that way. One card we talked about earlier that I think might actually just be good in general is just Clash of Might. So it lets you enable what I described in that Hamilton game a lot more as well, because
Mm.
you're just clashing more often. You're if you win with Wallop or Thunk, you're getting more mites and more vigors on top of winning with the Clash of Might, and it kind of just breaks the math of Flesh and Blood, or at least like the 4-card hand of slash 5-card hand of Flesh and Blood. So if it's like all points, I think that this card, especially with the heroes that are in the metagame, 4 is beating most of them, like we talked about a bunch. So it's not even necessarily that you're going to lose clashes putting this in your deck. I will say you will probably have to be careful with running this card in conjunction with um, Rouse the Ancients. So this might be one that you might only play 2 of. However, it might just make its way into the main board, cutting one of the other Blue Guardian attacks. So
Yeah, can we take a quick pivot, because for people that don't know Guardian math super well, like how do you build a deck that jives with Rouse the Ancients? How do you make sure that each hand that you're going to have it in, you're going to be able to reveal 13 or more total power?
well, so the problem is, usually you need to reveal an 8 card. So like a lot of the time, uh, you're doing Rouse, it's with all blues most, or no, I wouldn't say most of the time, probably I don't know, third of the time or something like that. Which you need one of your blues to be an 8, and then the other one to be like basically anything else, except for a 4. A 4 will not work with an 8. Shocker! It only goes
Mm-hmm.
to 12. You need 13. So that's why I said it's kind of clunky, even if you have the highest power blue you can have in your hand alongside that. Um, but other than that, you got to be careful with like pitching double 6. Like I said, usually Rouse is the kind of like a second cycle thing. So if you pitch double 6 next to each other and a blank or something like that, all of a sudden you can't reveal again. So being a second cycle deck, you kind of just have to be a little bit conscious of what you're playing. Like you don't have to remember anything in like super particular order. But one general rule that I can give as a tip as well is like, specifically if you're playing the Rouse package, you're like, okay, I pitched a Rouse, so within the next 3 cards, I need 13 power. So you can kind of
Mm.
just put that in the back of your mind with what cards you're blocking within your hand and what cards you're pitching. So it's like, should I, value? You might think, oh, I want to keep the Choke Slam in my deck because the blue Choke Slam has a relevant on hit into my opponent's deck. But in reality, you might want to keep the blue 8 power because it's going to line up with Rouse later on in the game, and you don't even have to know your exact 40 card pitch, 30 card pitch deck at that point. You just be like, oh, next time I see my Rouse, even if it's by itself, then I know that the next card's synchronized with it, even if it's in my next hand, so I can set it in arsenal and wait for my next
Mm.
hand. Basically, it's not that much memory required. You'd be like, I know I put in the work previously to set it up later, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in this game, especially when they first start out, tend to think of pitch stacking as kind of like, oh, I need to become a Kano Mind Palace person.
Yes,
Uh,
that's not. You
but
don't
no,
need to be that good with it.
I like the way you frame it. It's like you do the diligent work up front, and then you don't have to worry about it when it comes back around. Okay, so
Yeah, oh,
that's the blue base. Sorry, did you want to say one more thing on that?
no, I was ready to go on to like reds and stuff.
Okay, cool. Can we take a stop at yellows? I just want to talk about Righteous Cleansing real quick. I wonder about the use case of this card and what has you thinking that it has a place, at least in the maybe board.
So I think this might come out of the maybe board altogether. It
Hmm,
was kind of like New Cope, where it's like, oh, you blow up a bunch of chi at one
I
point in the
see.
game. Um, but it's also just like decent value, just to attack with it as well. Some heroes care about it more than others, but most of the time I think you'd rather spend it on like something that disrupts your opponent rather than you know, banishing cards from their deck, because most of the time it doesn't matter that much. So I think, although it looked appealing in the beginning, I think, I don't think I would look at this card moving forward. I don't think.
Then forget it. Let's not look at it at all. Let's talk about the reds. Where do
The
you want to go?
Reds, baby. I think the D-React's probably like I think you can afford to play 1, 3 of. So I think for me it's definitely still gonna be staunch. But once again, if you're struggling with Assassin, I'd probably favor the Shelter. Stops the dagger shenanigans and stuff like that. Sink Below can kind of fix your hands, but I think it's a little bit unnecessary. I think it plays a worse role in the matchups where you want D-Reacts than Staunch Response. So I think Staunch is the best. And then the other reds up there are kind of the go again package, like I described earlier. So a lot of these come in together. So if you want to play Beltines, usually you have to play Enethos. So you need to look at that as like a 4-card combo. And if you want to go overboard with the go again, it becomes Azel's Belting, Outmuscle, Enethos combo. So you need to find space with your deck construction that way. Personally, I don't like that full 7-card combo because Reds and Guardian um, are very highly contested because, like you were
Hmm.
describing earlier, that toolbox effect where what do you want to tech for? And the go again cards have the least like use cases when they're good because one, they block 2, the other ones are the crush cards are blocking 3, and a lot of these cards don't synergize well with each other. So if you draw 2 beltings in the same hand, all of a sudden it doesn't work. Muscle also has the downside of being able to be stopped by your opponent. A lot of the heroes do not are not able to stop it, but personally, I think I would go with other choices. Specifically, I think, like I was talking about earlier, the Snapdragon Scalers plus Strike Gold combo. See, that's much more appealing in my mind because that's more of like a 3-card combo because you probably wouldn't play 3 Strike Gold, but you could definitely play 2 in Snapdragons.
Hmm.
Um, and another consideration is the new. I know it was printed, I think, in like RTNs or whatever. Batter Tool Pulp. Uh, how we're describing where Gravy Bones cannot block because he has so many allies in his hand, or it. So like, let's just come up with this scenario where he has all allies in his hand, and or 3 allies, one thing, or one block blue card. All of a sudden, he's like, oh, I have to block this card, otherwise you blow up the compass, right? So he's like, activate Gravy, draw, discard an ally. Then he has 2 allies, and let's say he has 2 blocking cards in his hand. He has to block with both blocking cards as well as a piece of equipment, so either the glove for the first time or the chess piece if he's already blocked, just to stop the on hit. And if you think about his turn, with the context of the other cards don't block, they're also yellow and they don't do anything because they don't trigger the condition of playing a blue into the graveyard this turn. So this is why I kind of said like more aggro equal more win against Gravy, and I think
Hmm.
this is probably one of the cards I'd consider to play the most because, as well as if you think about it back in the day, a lot. In fact, I think the Michael Fang winning Pro Tour deck, if you look at that, if you go back and look, he played, I believe it's Red Thunderquake and Red Glacial Footsteps, which are both 6 for 10s. They do have text, but most of the time they're just 6 for 10s, and this one is already a 6 for 10, as well as having a very relevant on hit against Gravy, which
Hmm.
everyone thinks is going to be the new boogeyman of the format with Verdance. So I think if you, this is like one of the cards that I think is most likely going to slot in the deck, just very easily. I think it's more of a matter of, do you want to play 3 of them or do you want to play 2 of them? But I think in the future this card will definitely be in the deck.
Anything more to say about these reds? I do see a weakest link and a red Macho Grande, which is not often something that people run in Guardian without very specific cause. The blue one is in just about every single Guardian deck under the sun, but the red one, does this tie into that strategy of win more by hitting more?
Yeah, so this also allows you, like I told you, the Gravy Bones deck is playing no D-Reacts or no or 3 D-Reacts total.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they have. And in our experience, a lot of the time they are not even playing the uh,
Blood in the
Blood
Water.
in the Water card.
Hmm.
And if you kind of get into the state of getting them low, but not low enough for them to die, even if you like attack them, um, this kind of bails you out in the late game. Where like if you kind of accomplished your goal of aggroing them down, but you were just a little bit too short. This is like, oh, I win the game if
Yeah.
because they can't block 3, take 7. So this is like kind of like deal 7 to them most of the time, or deal 6 at least if you count the armor block that they have. So
And that's
this
assuming
kind
you
of
haven't.
enacts that.
That assumes you haven't generated a bunch of might tokens the turn before too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sometimes one of the games I played, I call it skadooshing. I hit some guy for like 25 dominate. I hit it. I was like, yeah, I'll tag you for 25. I'm like, get skadooshed.
you
I love mites.
you said this to your opponent. You did not say that to your opponent.
No, I did. I didn't say it to his face, but I said it to the homies.
And that counts just as much. Okay, well,
Yeah,
I think we should end it on skadooshing. What do you think, Matt?
yeah. I think that's good for me.
Anything left to say about Victor? I mean, Victor loves gold.
Yep.
It seemed to be a good Guardian field for the weekend. Are we re-entering a golden day age of Flesh and Blood for Matthew Vore?
I hope so. It depends on if there's any good Guardian cards in that Guardian set, or is it just a bunch of cards that say this only works against another Guardian hero? Who
so you, de-
knows? They might
so you,
make Guardians OP though, so you might need to play those cards.
it definitely. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. Guardian has been my boogeyman since I started in this game, and honestly, it kind of feels like it's been too long. I tend to think that there's some power coming for Guardian just because they've been down bad for more than any other class. It feels like lately.
Yeah. Hey, Victor's still good. Try him out.
I guess I should ask one last question before we go, Matt. You like the one hero that kind of captured your imagination the most until this weekend, until you felt like Guardian was kind of back in the meta besides Dromai was Verdance.
Hmm.
And like you said, she seemed like the pick. Was there any remorse at bringing Victor after seeing how well Majin Bay did ultimately?
No, because one, I did so well with Victor, and looking how we described the meta chart, like I think ultimately was it the best choice? Like you could probably argue like if you have the full information, you do a better pick. But I think with the information we had, it was the best pick we were gonna do. And I think a lot of the Verdance matchups are closer than I was comfortable with. Um, and I think the top players like Majin and Lucas were kind of just able to probably outskill their opponents rather than rely on deck strength. Because sometimes that deck just like fumbles and doesn't do its thing like at all. Um, so that's kind of why I got brought off of the deck. But I will say, like, she's still very powerful, obviously, because she won, nationals, and both of them had like undefeated records almost in CC and stuff like that. So, maybe a little bit of remorse. Like deep down, I'm like, "Oh, I wanted to be the wizard guy. I wanted to be the
Yeah.
wizard guy now. But I think I made the right choice for me.
And that's all we can ask of you, Matt.
Yep.
What are you gonna say to all of the Guardian mains that have been lying dormant so long, waiting for the moment where their Goldmane estate wouldn't get robbed by a Siren's Call?
Listen, it's time to rise up and start skadooshing people. I'm telling you, if you play Victor and you break more than 6 mites, you gotta say your opponent's getting skadooshed. It is what it is. It is what it is. You can thank me.
All right, folks, sleeve up this 80 and go ahead and try out that Matthew Vore skadoosh. If you have been liking what we've been putting out here at Arcane Games and Events, you can look forward to a lot more. We've got an AGE Open coming up for New England on June 28th, I want to say. That's a Saturday coming up. We'll be at Grave Troll Games in Nashua, New Hampshire. We've got another New England Open lined up for the next month. And of course, LA keeps rolling along, and we are trucking in both regions towards the Players' Championship. So definitely tune in and see what these players have in order to get those last couple AGE points and sneak their way into the top 16. Until next time, my name is Bryce Platts. My guest, of course, was Matthew Vore, and we will see you next time.